My name is Mira Vale, and for years I treated exhaustion like a second language. I rotated through 3 uniforms a day, barista green at dawn, custodian gray by afternoon, and library navy at night, convinced some people are simply built to run while others glide. If there was a blessing with my name on it, I had never seen so much as its shadow. That certainty cracked at a family dinner on a warm Georgia evening, under a chandelier that dripped light like melting sugar. Gran Evelyn Hart Love Ceremony. Her home was all white columns and climbing ivy, a house that made you lower your voice without knowing why. I entered late, smelling faintly of espresso and disinfectant, clutching a grocery store Merlot, as if the label might buy me respect. My mother, Diane, didn't look up. My sister, Celine, was in the center of every conversation, champagne silk moving like she'd rehearsed the air itself. There was a bracelet on her wrist that looked familiar in the way of something once promised then forgotten. Dinner was the usual theater. Whispered politics, careful compliments, real estate gossip that moved in code. I was furniture. Then Gran tapped her spoon to crystal, a small sound that quieted a room. "I'm proud of my granddaughters," she said, smile, warm, gaze sweeping. "Celine, your Charleston gallery is a triumph." Celine tucked a curl behind her ear and arranged her humility. Gran turned to me. "And Mira, I'm glad the 9,000 a month has helped. Comfort suits you. You deserve it." The number rang like a fire alarm in my head, 9,000. I waited for someone to laugh. They didn't. Celine's mouth tilted into a shape that could pass for empathy to anyone not looking too closely. I managed a thank you that tasted like tin and excused myself before the tablecloth could swallow me whole. On the wraparound porch, I sat with my back against a rail, opened my banking app and scrolled. Paychecks, rent, utilities, overdraft fees, no deposits labeled Hart Family Trust, no Monroe Foundation, nothing that started with 9 and ended with a soft landing. I checked older statements. I checked the other account I rarely used. Somewhere in the fog of night shifts, I remembered odd alerts from years ago. Security emails I'd dismissed because tired people make honest mistakes. I dug into permissions beneficiaries routing notes. My name appeared in places my hands had never been. There were transfers tagged Mira Vive, but not to me. They vanished into a number I didn't recognize. Inside, Celine laughed, the practiced kind that makes an audience feel lucky to hear it. I stared out at hedges, clipped into obedient shapes, and wondered when I became one of them. The answer didn't matter. I slipped my phone into my pocket and drove home with the taste of metal still in my mouth. I didn't sleep. Dawn found me rubbing at under eyeshadows like they were stains. By 8:30, I was standing beneath the glass arch of Harbor State Bank, a place that smells like toner and old decisions. The receptionist looked at the clock at my frayed composure and sent me to a private office. Ms. Harper, late 50s maroon blazer, efficient kindness. "How can I help? I need a full audit," I said. "Third-party access link devices alternated addresses. If my name touched it, I want to see it." Her fingers flew, scraping the surface of a story. "You're the primary," she murmured. "But there's an email we don't usually see on your file. Ends in gallery.co. Is it yours?" I shook my head. "Phone number's different, too. And the mailing address, Charleston." My mouth went dry. "My sister lives there." Ms. Harper printed a PDF and slid it toward me. A power of attorney dated 2 years back. My name typed cleanly. A signature practicing mine until it looked almost right. Almost. "Legal only if you sign knowingly," she said. I didn't. The words were steady, which surprised me. She kept printing statements, routing changes device logins from a city where I did not sleep. Monthly transfers labeled as support landed in an account whose profile said Mira Vale, but whose phone, email, and address belonged to Celine. There were also payments to an arts foundation I'd never heard of, and a lease on a luxury SUV I could identify, only because I'd mopped around one at the library fundraiser last spring. I asked for copies digital and paper. Ms. Harper gave me a look. "People reserve for those whose world just rearranged its furniture." "You're not the only one," she said quietly. "But you can be the one who documents first." Outside, the sun was bright and indifferent. I sat in my car, flipped through pages that smelled like heat and toner, and felt a sensation I hadn't given myself permission to feel clarity. not anger that would come and go like weather. Clarity sits, clarity weighs, clarity writes a list. I didn't plan to find Celine. I found her anyway the way you find noise in a quiet room. On Riverfront, she stepped out of a salon in camel-colored leather and sunglasses that did not see. She laughed into her phone, tossed her hair, and slid behind the wheel of a black SUV with plates too personal to be random. She didn't look in my direction, and I didn't offer myself the pleasure of confrontation. If I spoke to her now, I would be playing a game she already rigged. I memorized details, color time, the way the car's paint caught sunlight like a brag. Back in my studio, I spread the documents across a table that had doubled as a desk and a dinner surface, and sometimes a place to rest my forehead. I made columns, dates, amounts, routes, names. I pinned the POA to the top like a headline. I took photos of everything and backed them up twice. Tiredness arrived, but it wasn't the old kind. This one hummed with purpose. At noon, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. She texted a single line, "Don't make a scene." I smiled without humor. Scenes were Celine's department. Mine would be records. By late afternoon, the day had the glaze of heat on it that makes the whole city look like a rumor. I considered driving back to Gran Evelyn's, walking through the front door, and setting the papers on her linen runner like a new kind of centerpiece. But there are ways to break a story that don't shatter the person hearing it, and I couldn't risk turning an ally into wreckage. Gran had said 9,000 with love in her voice. Love can be misled. Love can be forged. Love can also learn. I showered off coffee and bleach and put on a clean shirt that still smelled like the rack. Then I sat down with a blank document and gave it a name that would not flinch Case Note's identity and financial abuse. I wrote the facts as if I were somebody else reading them for the first time. No adjectives, no metaphors. Just the sneaky shape of numbers walking out the door wearing my face. Evening slid across the window. River sounds drifted up tourists as saxophone tires on cobblestone. I closed the blinds. When your world has been edited, privacy stops being luxury and becomes oxygen. I set alarms for the next morning bank again, then county records, then a quiet call to a legal clinic that takes appointments if you show up looking like you've run out of later. My phone lit on the counter. A new email subject line, family update. It was from Celine, sent to a list that included me, Gran, and aunts who loved appearances the way some people love dogs. The body was 3 paragraphs of curated assurance about a new exhibit, the Foundation's successes and gratitude for our family's unwavering support. It ended with a photo of her in a black dress, chin lifted, a flash of green at her throat that looked like a promise repurposed. I archived the message. Some evidence you keep, some you simply stop letting in. Night arrived. I lay on the bed fully dressed and stared at the ceiling fan blades until they seemed to unspool from the fixture. I imagined the conversation to come, what I would say to Gran, what I would not say to my mother, what I would never again ask of Celine. The future doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it stands in the doorway with a stack of printouts and waits for you to clear a corner of the table. At 2 a.m., I labeled folders. At 3, I wrote a timeline in pen because ink makes you commit. At 4, I set the documents back in their sleeve and put my keys on top. The keys were ordinary, a cheap metal pair on a ring that squeaked. They were also mine, which is a quiet miracle when you realize how much of your life has been borrowed. When the sun showed up pale and innocent, I was ready. Not to shout, not to plead, to proceed. Part of me wanted to be kind to the girl I had been, one who explained away red flags because she was too tired to hold them. But there's a difference between mercy and denial. Mercy tells the truth and hands you a map. I picked up the folder, locked the door, and stepped into air that smelled like orange blossoms in the back half of a storm. The next call would not be polite, it would be precise. And this time, every word would carry my own name. I used to think the hardest part of any day was the last shift, the hour when your body goes quiet, but your brain keeps jogging in place. I was wrong. The hardest part is walking into your parents' house with proof that the people who taught you to sign your name helped someone else write over it. The oak trees along Maple Crescent bent toward each other like they were sharing a secret. Our porch light was on even though it was noon. My mother liked it that way, welcoming in a curated sort of way. I knocked once and pushed the door open. The air smelled like lemon oil and a candle labeled home. "Mom," I called. My father popped up from the sofa with a gardening magazine half closed on his knee. "Mira," he said, already heading toward the kitchen, "coffee." "No," I answered, and it came out sharper than I intended. He nodded as if he'd expected that and let the cabinet door swing shut without clanking. My mother, Diane, stepped in from the dining room, dish towel in hand like a prop. "You look tired," she said. She didn't say hello. "I need to talk to you," I replied. I set a slim folder on the console table, the cheap kind of folder that turns expensive once you know what's inside. "About my accounts, about what Gran said last night." She didn't glance at the papers. "A family dinner isn't the place for dramatics." "This isn't dramatics, it's documentation." I opened the folder before she could pivot away. A printout of a power of attorney form stared up at us. My name typed neatly, a signature that wanted very badly to be mine. Behind it, address changes, device, logins, and email ending in gallery.co. Monthly transfers tagged in a way that made it look like I was being helped. Her gaze flicked down, then back to my face. "Celine stepped in because you weren't steady," she said. Voice even teacherly, like I was late to a lesson. 3 jobs, missed calls, lost track of things. She established guardrails. "Guardrails don't reroute money into her life," I said. "They keep people safe in their own lane." "You weren't doing anything with it," she replied, as if we were discussing a sweater I never wore. "Your sister knows how to manage. She kept your name away from complications." My laugh came out thin. "And tied it to a luxury SUV and donations that make her look generous." My father edged back into the room with a mug he didn't offer anyone. He sat, but didn't settle, his eyes fixed on a safe spot on the carpet. "You always make this harder than it needs to be," my mother said. "Celine created order. You create mess." "I create a living," I said. "And you let someone else live as me." She folded the dish towel carefully, like precision might translate to righteousness. "This is not a courtroom, Mira." "Not yet," I answered. Something small shifted in her expression, annoyance shading into something colder. "Think about the family," she said. "Your grandmother's health. Your sister's work depends on reputation. Mine depends on identity," I said. "We're done here." I left the papers on the table and walked out. No one followed. The door was lighter than I remembered. Back at my studio, I did what exhausted people do when they've been given a reason to stay awake. I organized. I built a spreadsheet with columns that would never love me back. Dates, amounts, recipients, notes. I matched transfers to new addresses. I screen captured app permissions. I wrote down the times I brushed off security alerts as user error, and wrote them again in bolder ink as red flag ignored. I ordered a cheap scanner online, and while I waited for the delivery window to lie to me, walked 2 blocks to the shipping store and used theirs. By the time the sky turned the color of old lavender, my folder had a sibling and my heartbeat had an objective. I went to bed with the lamp on and woke with it still shouldering the room. The next afternoon, my phone lit up with a name that made my breath do something complicated. Gran Evelyn. I let it ring twice before answering. "Sweetheart," she said, voice warm but thinner than it had been the night before. "Are you free on Saturday? I could use help with photo albums. My fingers don't like the corners anymore." 100 responses collided in my mouth and agreed to narrow into one. "I'll be there," I said. Her house looked like it always did, like old money had been taught good posture. The columns threw long shadows across the lawn, and someone had clipped the hedges into ovals that felt fancy and a little nervous. I rang the bell. She opened the door herself. "Thank you for coming," she said, and stepped aside without reaching for a hug. "There are lots of ways to say I'm not sure what I don't know yet." Gran chose silence. We settled in the parlor, where a wooden box of albums waited on the coffee table like a confession wrapped in leather. I pulled one onto my lap. Family gatherings 2016 to 2021. We turned pages. Birthdays, equinox dinners, a garden party with a harp I vaguely remember carrying inside because a storm arrived in a hurry. People smiled with all their teeth. Celine was in every frame like the camera loved her, and she loved training it. We reached Easter 2019, Charleston redecorated porch, pastel ribbons lining the staircase. Everyone was there, except me. "Beautiful day," Gran said, tapping a lacquered fingernail against the plastic sleeve. "Do you remember it?" "I do," I said. Because I took these. She blinked slowly. Celine told me you didn't make it that year. I made it, I said, just not into the frame. We turned more pages. Thanksgiving, New Year's. I was the absence that made the layout clean. Gran's mouth drew into a thin line that made her look like her own mother for a second. I'm going to get some water, I murmured, and slipped into the kitchen. The faucet still squeaked at the start. On the counter sat Gran's flip phone in its cradle, a small, stubborn relic in a room that otherwise kept up. I don't know what part of me reached for it. Habit, maybe. Memory. I opened voicemail. Most were reminders from the pharmacy and messages from women who called her dear because they were the same age. Then one caught my eye, saved April 8th, 2021. Unknown. I pressed play. Mira dear, I sent the gift through Celine. Did you receive it? Call me. I hope it helps. Love you. The phone felt heavier when I set it down. I brought it back to the parlor and pressed the message on speaker. Gran listened without blinking. When it ended, she folded the phone shut with careful hands and kept them closed over it like she was warming them. I ordered something for your birthday that spring, she said. You always liked green. What was it, I asked, though I already knew, because my throat had begun to ache in a very particular way. An emerald pendant, she said, custom. We both looked at the albums and at the space between them. She exhaled, and the sound wasn't defeat. It was accounting. Could we look in the sideboard, I asked. You keep old receipts there. She arched a brow, then nodded. We moved a stack of cloth napkins and a tarnished silver tray. Beneath them, a pale green envelope addressed in her careful hand my name in the center, underlined like a blessing. Inside a receipt, custom emerald necklace paid in full shipping to Charleston. Behind it, a printed email from Celine at gallery.co to Evelyn. Heart at. Don't worry about Mira. She's in a delicate place. Better if I hold on to it for now. Delicate, I repeated. The word tasted sour. Gran's eyes went to the edge of the rug. I thought I was doing what was right, she said, trusting the one who seemed steady. She made sure I stayed out of sight, I replied. My voice was steady in a way that felt new. That isn't steadiness. That's control. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them and looked straight at me, the way you look at a photograph after you clean the glass. I see that now. It wasn't an apology, and it didn't need to be. It was a correction. I slid the receipt and the email back into the envelope and then into my purse. I need to make a call, I said. I stepped onto the back porch where the air smelled like rosemary and the sky was practicing evening. Celine picked up on the third ring, her voice bright, like she was always backstage somewhere. Mira, to what do I owe thee, son? You know what I found, I said. No heat, no tremble, just the sentence. A beat, then a small laugh. If this is about that necklace, it's about boundaries, I said. If one more thing attached to my name goes missing money mail, anything, I won't be dialing you next time. I'll be calling counsel. Counsel, she repeated as if trying the word on in a mirror. You're overreacting. You have always needed management. I've kept you from falling apart more times than I can count. That isn't protection, I said. That's possession. And I am not yours. I ended the call before she could turn her voice into a net. 2 weeks wanted to be quiet and failed. I worked my jobs. I added lines to the spreadsheet. I slept like a person dragging a heavy suitcase upstairs in her sleep. On a Thursday morning, an envelope arrived under my apartment door, thin and white, and pretending to be ordinary. Inside, a debt notice. $30,000. My name at the top. An address in Charleston at the bottom. For a long moment, I just sat there, the paper open on my knees, the room breathing around me. Then I stood, changed my shirt, and drove to Harbor State Bank. Ms. Harper didn't ask many questions. She read the letter, looked up at me and said, "Same hands. New pen." "Same pattern," I replied. She moved through her system like someone dusting for fingerprints. "We'll flag the account," she said, "and we need to document every instance. Don't throw away anything that arrives in your mailbox, especially if it looks like trash." Trash is where they hide threads. We scanned the notice, appended it to the file she'd started for me, and printed a packet I could carry into the world. She slid it across the desk. "People who do this don't stop because you ask them to," she said. "They stop because you make them." I left with a packet under my arm and turned right at the corner instead of left. A block away stood a brick building with an ivy problem and a brass plaque that read, Herrera & Co. Counselors at Law. I had researched David Herrera 2 weeks earlier and saved his number without calling. Saving a number is hope with stage fright. The receptionist led me into a small conference room with a view of a tree that had lost a fight with a storm and decided to grow sideways instead. Herrera walked in a minute later, late 40s, careful eyes, sleeves already rolled. "Ms. Vale," he said, shaking my hand. "What brings you to me?" I put the packet on the table. "Identity misuse," I said. "Financial abuse." "I know who's behind it." He read without interrupting. He lifted his brows at the forged POA bit the inside of his cheek, at the emerald receipt, locked his jaw at the debt notice. "You have a case," he said when he finished. "A strong one." The words didn't rush relief into me. They rearranged the oxygen. "What does strong mean?" I asked. "It means we file a civil action for fraud, conversion, and identity theft under state law," he replied. "We seek injunctive relief to stop ongoing use of your name and accounting of funds and damages. The forged power of attorney is a linchpin. If the signature analysis confirms your denial, it speaks loudly. We can also refer the matter to the county's Economic Crimes Unit. Criminal is a separate track, slower, sometimes messier, but the existence of a civil case doesn't prevent it." I pictured my mother's face at the word criminal, and then placed that picture on a high shelf where I couldn't knock it over by mistake. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Everything you have, and everything you remember," he said. "Dates, screenshots, the voicemail from your grandmother if she'll let you have a copy, names of anyone who witnessed unusual behavior, bank staff, neighbors, family, employees. We'll also send preservation letters to the relevant institutions so nothing can be accidentally deleted." "Gran will cooperate," I said, and realized as I spoke that I believed it. He nodded. "Good. We'll start with a demand letter to the opposing party. Sometimes that shakes loose a settlement. Given the family dynamics, I'll advise against anything that trades silence for pennies. Your credit and your name are worth more than a neat ending." "Agreed," I said. He slid a retainer agreement across the table. The fee structure was not friendly, but it was honest. I signed with a pen that worked on the first try. "We'll draft the complaint today," he said, checking his watch. "File early next week. You'll need to be ready for escalation, public and private. People who build their lives on image are allergic to discovery." "Discovery can be dramatic," I said. "It can also be precise," he replied, and that was the first time I felt like maybe I'd hired the right person. Outside, the afternoon had folded into something softer. I walked past a bakery I used to stare at through glass, past a bookstore where I once put a novel back on the shelf because the price matched my weekly gas budget, past a park bench where I'd sat after a double shift and convinced myself tired was a personality. The packet in my hand wasn't heavy, but my arm ached anyway. Bodies aren't calculators. They keep different ledgers. At home, I set the folder on the table and wrote timeline across the top of a legal pad. Not the romantic kind. No loops or flowers, just straight letters like fence posts. I called Gran. She picked up on the first ring. "I need a copy of that voicemail," I said, "and the envelope with a receipt." "I'll have Otis scan them," she answered, and I could hear in her voice that she had already told the man who had worked for her longer than I've been alive to bring out the good scanner. "Mira," she added. I believed what I wanted to believe. That was unkind in its own way. "We can be unkind without meaning to," I said, "but we can also stop." We said very little else. When I hung up, I stared at my ceiling for a while and tried not to imagine my mother's expression when she found out I was moving forward. Mothers are mythic until they're not. Daughters are accommodating until they aren't. I didn't tell anyone else. Not because I was protecting them, because I didn't owe them a running commentary on the restoration of my own name. That weekend, I worked both the early shift at the cafe and the late shift at the library. Between them, I sat in my car and ate a ham sandwich, like it was a ritual, which I suppose it was cheap bread, a slice of meat mustard drawn in a line as straight as I could manage in a parking lot. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number requesting confirmation for a delivery to Emsa Vale Charleston address on file. I took a screenshot and forwarded it to Herrera with the caption, "More of the same." He replied 2 minutes later, "Got it. Preserving." On Monday, I sat across from the county clerk while she stamped a small stack of forms related to my identity protection request, temporary measures that act like sandbags while you wait for the bigger barriers to go up. Each thud of the seal against paper was not a victory song. It was a metronome. We were keeping time until the orchestra started. I walked out into a sky that had decided on gray and felt the particular kind of calm that arrives when you've stopped asking for permission from people who would always prefer you quiet. I didn't want revenge. Revenge is loud and hungry and never full. I wanted boundaries that held and facts that didn't bend when someone smiled at them. Back in my apartment, I stacked the documents in the order Herrera preferred and clipped them. I labeled a flash drive and tucked it into the inside pocket of my bag. I put the emerald receipt in a clear sleeve where I could see it without touching it like a museum piece of a story that was dangerous when handled bare. My phone chimed. An email from Herrera draft complaint attached. Review for accuracy. I read it once for content, once for tone, and once more for the way my name looked printed in a font that didn't apologize for existing. At the end, there was a line that mattered more than anything else on the page. Plaintiff demands a jury trial. I typed a note back, minor corrections on 2 dates, an address digit I'd transposed, because my hand still remembers tired more than truth. He thanked me and said the filing would go out first thing in the morning. I set my alarm. I cleaned my sink. I put my keys in a dish by the door, and my shoes side by side, as if my life had always made this kind of sense. I didn't know what would come next. Who would call? Who would threaten? Who would pretend this was a misunderstanding? We could fix with a nicer tablecloth. But I knew who I would be inside it, a person whose documents matched her name, and whose voice once quiet had learned the discipline of speaking plainly. Sometime in the night, a notice slid into my inbox with pastel script and the word celebration in the subject line. I didn't open it, not yet. There would be time for rooms full of people and chandeliers and speeches aimed like arrows disguised as toasts. For now, I turned off the light and let the dark settle around a life that for the first time in a long time belonged to me. The subject line I hadn't opened all weekend waited like a lit fuse, a toast to love family celebration. It was my cousin Mallory's engagement party, dressed in pastel borders and polite fonts. I RSVP'd, yes. Not because I owed anyone a smile, but because I refused to be the blank space in another family photograph. The venue was a renovated theater downtown, washed brick strings of lights draped like constellations someone arranged by hand. I wore a slate-wrapped dress that didn't beg for attention and didn't apologize either. Inside the quartet worked through agreeable classics, and conversations hovered in little islands around cocktail tables. Aunts practiced their kindest eyes. Uncles laughed at nothing. Celine arrived 15 minutes late the way people do when they want their timing to be noticed. Her dress caught light in a whisper of black sequins. At her throat sat a green spark, the emerald that was supposed to be mine worn with the casual arrogance of something kept for safekeeping. She made a circuit kissing cheeks, converting whispers to applause. Someone tapped a glass. Celine lifted her flute. To Mallory and Daniel, she said voice-tuned for the room. May honesty be your foundation, steadiness your shelter, and may you never let outsiders poison what family builds. The pause wasn't long, but it was loud. A few people giggled the way people do when they don't want to stand too still inside the truth. I took a sip of water and let the comment pass over me like a shadow that forgot to check the weather. You can drown in a room you refuse to leave. I stayed because oxygen was a choice. A hand touched my arm. Diane hair, perfect mouth tight. Outside, she ordered, not asked. On the patio, magnolia bloomed like a dare. She didn't bother with preface. End this, she said. Withdraw your complaint. You're embarrassing us. She borrowed my name, I answered. I'm returning it. She protected you, my mother shot back. You've always been fragile. Celine created order. Order without consent is control, I said. Her voice dropped. If you keep this up, don't call me your mother. The words fell between us like a plate. I didn't flinch. Then you should stop acting like Celine's press secretary. Color rose in her cheeks. You are not the victim you think you are. I'm not thinking, I said. I have receipts. I left her there with the magnolias and went back inside. People pretended to be very busy chewing. Celine flashed me the kind of smile used to sell houses with mold. I didn't sleep that night. Morning found me at my table, pages arranged in a grid that looked like a city view from above, streets of dates, neighborhoods of transactions, rivers of rationale that no longer flowed. My phone rang just before noon. Otis. The man who had trimmed hedges and hauled chairs and quietly made our family look effortless for 40 years. Miss Mira, he said, voice low. I should have said this earlier. I saw your mother and Miss Celine in the garden back in 21, burning envelopes. One had your name. Your mother said she doesn't need to see these. It'll just confuse her. I pressed the phone tighter. Would you tell Gran? I will, he said. She deserves to hear it honest. That Sunday, Gran Evelyn announced a family supper. Her invitations never asked. They summoned. The house glowed in early evening light. Every window lit, every surface polished into a reflection. We filed into the dining room like we'd all rehearsed. The table ran long silver china linen that could forgive spills. A prayer was offered. Hands moved toward plates. Gran stood before anyone lifted a fork. Before we eat, she said, we will set our table with truth. No one in my family is trained for silence, but somehow it arrived. She turned to me, Shora. I didn't give a speech. I named facts. A power of attorney submitted in 2021 using my name, not my hand. Transfers labeled as support routed to accounts controlled by Celine. Mail and gifts intercepted. A debt opened in my name with her address. An emerald ordered for me shipped to her. Aunties shifted. Uncles coughed. My father studied his water glass as if it could answer for him. Otis stepped from the hall cap off spine straight. Gran nodded him forward as though she'd planned the blocking. I saw Miss Diane and Miss Celine burning mail addressed to Miss Mira, he said. I mind my business. I did that day. I shouldn't have. Celine laughed light and credulous. We're really doing trial by Butler now. Enough, Gran said, not raising her voice. Command doesn't need volume. Celine recalibrated. I protected her, she insisted. She was unstable. You all know it. I kept her out of trouble. I managed perceptions. If I told her about every penny, every gift she would have. Lived her own life, I said, steady. Diane found her footing. This should remain private, she said to Gran. You of all people understand the value of discretion. Gran's gaze didn't move. Discretion without integrity is complicity. For the first time I can remember, Celine didn't have an expression ready. This is cruel, she tried. After all I've done. Done to whom, Gran asked, and with whose permission? When people say a room goes cold, they mean the thermostat failed. This was different. It was temperature as judgment. Gran placed both hands on the back of her chair. I trusted the wrong granddaughter. She said, not a confession, not a flourish. An accounting entry finally placed in the proper column. She turned to Celine. You are no longer welcome in my home. You will not act for this family nor speak in its name. Leave your key with Otis. Celine's mouth opened and closed, a fish encountering air for the first time. She looked to my father. He didn't look up. She looked to Diane. My mother looked back at Gran, calculating a future. At last, Celine's eyes landed on me. For a heartbeat, I saw the girl who used to grip my hand too tight on haunted hay rides. Then the lights in her expression rearranged into something colder. She set her napkin down like it was an exit document, stood, and walked the length of the table. Her heels clicked a verdict. At the door, she paused, fingers to the emerald as if confirming it still belonged to her neck, if not her story. Then she was gone. The clatter of silver resumed, but cautiously, like the table might spook. We ate. No one asked for seconds. When plates were cleared, people drifted into hallways, conversations breaking apart like ice. I helped Otis carry a stack of dishes to the kitchen. He nodded once in the language of men who have worked through worse weather. Gran touched my sleeve. Come by tomorrow, she said. We have documents to correct. On the drive home, the city felt rearranged. Not brighter, not darker, truer. When your spine has been negotiating with itself for years, standing straight is a kind of joy that doesn't need witnesses. Herrera's email waited when I unlocked my door. Filed. The complaint had gone out that morning. There would be answers to serve preservation notices, to send 100 procedural steps that sound small and are not. Discovery is a light switch with a dimmer. You turn it slowly, or you blind yourself. I set my keys in the dish and the folder on the table, and sat there a long time without touching anything. I wasn't victorious. I wasn't even finished. But I was no longer predictable in the ways that had kept other people comfortable. Outside, a train wailed somewhere past the river. Inside, the fan spun quietly above me. Not a metaphor, just a fan doing its job without asking to be thanked. I poured a glass of water and drank every drop. In the morning, I would go to the clerk's office, then the bank, then to Gran's study where paper would be signed and a record would begin to heal. There would be fallout. There always is when you stop acting your assigned part. But I had a map and my name was on it. I turned out the light and let the dark be merely dark. Part of the story had finally said itself out loud. The rest would require stamped signatures and the quiet persistence of people who are done being edited. Monday at the courthouse felt oddly quiet, like a museum before doors open. I sat across from the county clerk while she stamped through a small tower of filings, revocation of the forged power of attorney identity. Restoration orders, notices to the bureaus, an injunction barring further use of my name. Each seal landed with a neat, heavy sound. It wasn't catharsis. It was correction. Outside, Savannah wore a thin cloud cover that made colors gentler. I walked straight to Harbor State Bank. Ms. Harper met me in a side office already primed with forms. We updated every field that had been bent out of shape phone email address and locked the profile behind layers of verification no one could helpfully bypass. She printed confirmation pages and slid them into a fresh folder. "One more thing," she said, tapping the debt notice copy. "We flagged the account and notified the lender. Given today's orders, they'll have to peel it off you." "Thank you," I said, and meant the ordinary words as much as anything I'd said all spring. From there, I drove to Gran Evelyn's. The study smelled like old books and lemon polish, the way truth ought to smell when you sign it. She had papers arranged in tidy stacks, trust communications, address books, contact sheets for attorneys and accountants. Otis stood by the door with a scanner and a concentration that could level a building. "We're putting the house back in order," Gran said simply. "We sent letters revoking anything that referenced Celine as my proxy. We updated contact lists. We scheduled a formal accounting." When we finished, Gran set her pen down and looked at me as if through new glass. "I can restore distributions," she offered, not as a bribe, not as penance an option. "I'm all right," I said, "if you want to help direct it to the library fund downtown. They need a children's reading room that doesn't leak when it rains." Her mouth softened. "Done. I moved that week." The new place sat near the edge of the county, where wildflowers ignore property lines. The floors creaked like honest knees. The porch swing had a lopsided rhythm I decided to like. I signed the lease with a pen that didn't skip and turned the key until the lock clicked for me, and me alone. Utilities in my own name. Mail with my name arriving because that's where I live. I bought a second-hand bookcase, a plain rug, a lamp shaped like an apology that had learned its lesson. On the last evening of unpacking, I opened the box labeled Photos. Inside was a reprint from the Charleston brunch I'd taken years ago, this time with me in it. Hair across my cheek mouth, mid-laugh, not glamorous, not curated. Proof. I slid it into a simple frame and set it on the bookcase beside a jar of beach glass I'd collected one lonely summer and never threw away. The civil case did what cases do, crept forward, then leaped, then paused. Herrera sent updates without theatrics. The judge granted additional protective orders. Subpoenas went out. Copies of copies surfaced emails that had sounded reasonable in rooms where no one said no. I didn't Google any of it late at night. I learned to close my laptop at 10 and make tea, like sleep was something you could encourage instead of chase. On a Thursday, Gran came by unannounced, a small brown paper box in her hands. She stepped inside as if the floor might be delicate and placed the box on my table. "I never gave this to you properly," she said. Inside, cushioned in velvet, lay the emerald pendant, quiet green, more river than gemstone. It looked smaller than the idea of it had been, which made it feel truer. "I'm not the girl you chose it for," I said, because that was also true. No, Gran replied, smiling in a way that had nothing to prove. "You're the woman who can wear it." We didn't talk long. She admired the crooked porch swing. I packed her a paper cup of coffee for the drive. At the door, she paused. "You were never invisible," she said. "I was inattentive." "I see the difference," I answered. After she left, I threaded the pendant and set it on the dresser. Maybe I'd wear it to the library interview. Maybe it would just live where morning light could touch it. Not everything has to be displayed to be real. A week later, a card arrived with no return address. The handwriting tilted like it was hurrying to admit its fault. I should have spoken it read. I didn't. "I'm sorry. Dad, I didn't know what to do with the past he was apologizing for, so I did nothing." I tucked the card in the back of the photo frame. Seeing isn't always forgiving. Sometimes it's simply seen. The interview at the branch went the way good conversations go, straight unforced. We talked about story time and grant writing and the smell of paperbacks in summer. When they asked why libraries, I didn't give a speech. Because stories keep receipts, I said. And because kids should learn early that their names belong to them. On the first night, I slept without waking to check the deadbolt rain started and never found a leak. I lay there listening to it test the edges of the roof and fail in the gentlest way. The city breathed. Somewhere a train pulled a long thread through the dark. I thought of the girl who used to mistake silence for safety, and then of the woman who had learned another definition, silence, that arrives after the shouting because the structure has been fixed. People wanted to know how it ended. It didn't end with a speech or a spectacle. It ended the way repairs end, one measured turn, one document, one key at a time, until the door fits the frame again and the room holds. There will be fallout. I can't predict, and conversations I might never have. That's not unfinished business. That's life refusing to be symmetrical. I set the photo face out on the shelf, turned off the lamp, and let the dark be ordinary. The story I'm in now still includes my family, but not as editors. It includes my name, but not as costume. It includes a green stone that used to mean what was taken, and now means what stayed. When morning came, I made coffee, opened the planner I bought with my own card, and wrote in today's square proceed. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.